All right, recording starting. Go for it.
Very good. Okay. Hi, guys. My name is Logan Hillard. My background is networking, pen testing, and cybersecurity in general. I've done systems administration, I've done help desk. I was a tier three network engineer as well as the tech lead at a corporation contracting through Microsoft. Seen the gambit. I'm also a uh, small business owner, and I am the systems administrator for my small business as well as all of its clients. I've started working with Jeremy, Nathan recently, and Jay in Training. Jay in Training and LNG, which is my company, have basically teamed up, and we are producing these cybersecurity talks as well as performing more high-level training. I just passed my SC 200. Nice, super happy about that. It was really difficult, but basically that gave me a coverage on Azure Sentinel, Azure Defender, and basically all the Azure products in general, including things like KQL, which is utilized for threat hunting queries and things like that in the Azure platform, as well as others like Carbon Black, Cylance. They all use all the same. They all utilize the same standard KQL queries. So that's kind of about me. LNG Technologies is the company that I run, and most of the time, what I'm doing is basically this, right? I've started to kind of branch off into other sectors and give talks on other things that I'm extremely passionate about. And one of my passions is cybersecurity for generalists, right? Basically for everybody, and that's really what this talk is about, right? Cybersecurity for everyone. And I think as people in the cybersecurity field, we basically need to be proponents of cybersecurity in general, right? We all need to be um, trying to not necessarily push, but advocate for cybersecurity practices generally, right? And so we're going to talk about some of the really basic ones. Anyone who's really been in the cybersecurity field already knows most of this. I don't have slides, so I'm just going to be talking through it. And again, if anyone has any questions, literally just stop me, throw up your hand, just start talking, whatever it is, and I will stop and discuss. But we're just going to talk on touch on some major points here that I think are really important for all of us to know. And whenever we're actually in a scenario where someone says something that kind of goes against some basic cybersecurity norms, we need to be, again, not the one who's pushing back on it necessarily, but the one who is advocating for a more secure solution, right? So one of the first ones is going to be principal of least privilege, right? And many of us have kind of heard of this idea of principal of least privilege, but generally, principal of least privilege needs to be followed in basically every scenario, right? So let's just say, for instance, right, Jeremy bringing on Chris, right? If you gave Chris a domain admin account in your 365 environment, that would not be following principal of least privilege, right? And this happens all the time. This is a very strategic, I guess, from a business perspective, it's a lot easier most of the time just to kind of hand out some credentials and just be like, hey, that's it. Here you go. Have fun with it. Figure it out, right? That's happened to me at several businesses that I've worked with. That's happened to me with multiple clients. Sometimes clients just give me information that I'm not supposed to have. So again, as people who are aware of cyber, we need to kind of keep that on the top of our minds, especially as consultants. Whenever we get access, right? Especially if we haven't signed an NDA, if we get access to a client's environment, we need to be cautious with the information that they're giving us. And again, we can advocate for less access, right? I think that's actually a brilliant idea, not only as someone who is interested in cyber, but from a consulting perspective. You're trying to build that trust with that client, and if you're saying, "Hey, I need less access to your systems," that's kind of showing that you're not out here to do anything malicious. You're trying to keep everything straight, right? So, principal
Yeah,
least privilege is
trust,
extremely
trust
important.
and credibility.
Right, 100%. So you're building that with your client whenever you're making these types of decisions, right? Um, so this kind of goes along with it. This idea of like a local administration, local admins, and here I'll start posting these, Jeremy, for you. Local admins are basically uh, what happens in environments that are not being managed. I've been in a few environments that did this. I'm not going to name names, but essentially every user was an administrator on their machine. We're not going to get into some of the details on exactly how that can that can throw a wrench in your cybersecurity posture for your organization. But let's just say I'm an attacker and I land on your system. If you're a local admin on that system and anyone, if you have anything on that system, if you're a local admin, all of it is mine if I land on that system. So being a local administrator is not good from a cybersecurity posture perspective, because the attackers, right? Because it's not if, it's when the attackers that land on that system in the future are going to instantly be admins. And being a local admin can lead you to domain admin, if there is even domain admin. Oftentimes, local admins are user accounts that have higher privileges, right? Basically, the highest privileges, and oftentimes these user accounts are actually copied on all machines. So if you get into one machine with local admin, you're likely into all machines with the same credentials. This is also known as password reuse. Password reuse attacks are extremely prevalent, and they exist everywhere, right? If you guys have had something get hacked before, it was likely through a password reuse attack. It wasn't necessarily that you got phished. It was likely that they found your credentials somewhere else and then they just used them elsewhere, right? If you lost your Twitter account or your Facebook account or whatever it was probably because someone else leaked your credentials and you're using those credentials somewhere else. We'll get back to that later on towards the end of this presentation here. There's something that I just want to touch on very briefly called logging in versus escalating. Most people don't really understand this process. This is a really fundamental technical process when it comes to how the operating system actually stores your credentials. Whenever you are logging in locally, that information gets saved in cache. Right? And so we don't necessarily need to know what that means. Basically, it means memory. We save those credentials in cache. And what that means, again, is if I'm an attacker, that information can be stolen. It's on the device. Whenever I escalate my privileges, so if I log into a machine and I say I'm a user currently, right, but I need to do something that an admin would do. If I increase my privileges by making a request to have increased privileges, if I try to do something as an admin and it says, whoa, you're not an admin, and you actually go through the UAC, it's called user access control, I think, on Windows. If you go through a UAC prompt, that is actually an escalation of privileges, which is not the same thing as logging in with escalated privileges. Those are two completely different ways to store the data. The data is a request as an escalation. It actually goes over the network, which sometimes sounds bad, but that's actually much more secure than keeping the data locally on the system. Okay, logging in just saves that information locally. It will have to make that first request over the network, but it saves it on the machine. As an attacker, I am hoping that you have logged into the machine with domain admin credentials or something like that, so that they can be so that I can steal them. Okay, so that's it's a technical idea, but I just want to give the bare bones meat of that conversation so you guys can kind of understand the difference and why attackers are looking for that type of stuff and why users aren't supposed to be using domain admin credentials. You're not even supposed to be a domain admin, even if you are a domain admin. You log in with user creds, and then you escalate as needed. This also kind of follows principle of least privilege, right? Don't just be using credentials that you don't need. Use the credentials that you need, and then as necessary, upgrade. This is the proper way to do it. This is how it should be done in enterprise environments. All right, so the next step is going to be user training. So this one is really obvious, but it's something that I'm very passionate about. It's something that definitely needs to be discussed more frequently because users generally are not well trained on cybersecurity concepts. I have seen companies not train their employees and see legitimate, you know, issues from that lack of training. Instead of spending the upfront costs on someone like Jeremy or myself to come in and train the organization, right? They prefer to say, well, I'm sure it'll be fine. We have backups, right? Backups are fine. EDR, antivirus. We got antivirus. It'll be good. Without user training, this is really your first line of defense. Without user training, you are going to run into a scenario where the user basically lets the attacker in. And now it's up to all of your other security controls. There's something called defense in depth. I probably should I'll add this into chat here. Defense in depth is a really big conversation that I have with with my clients. And that defense in depth posture, right? That defense in depth mentality is essentially where you're trying to secure at every level. And that's extremely important. However, if one of our controls just completely gets bypassed because we're not performing user training, that is going to kind of force us into a scenario where we basically have to validate that all the other controls don't get bypassed, right? So again, that first line of defense is really the users. Through your email account, if you get phished, the first thing that is going to stop them is you. There really are no other controls in front of that, maybe other than maybe Exchange, right? Maybe safe attachments and safe links in Azure. All right, so that user training is extremely important to combat phishing. Phishing is an extremely important concept. I don't know if I actually have, let me see, I think I have an email here. All right, so I'm just going to show an email really quick. This guy here. Right? And again, there might be some confidential information like my email on there or whatever, but don't worry about that. Just look at the email itself, okay? This is an email. This is a phishing email from a user, right? Coming in as proaction-ins.com, and then the name of the email is configuration, something about passwords, and for some reason the way that this was written basically bypass all the security controls in 365, all the base standard ones. And if you hover over this link, you'll see that it basically takes me to some location. Okay, there's a few things I want to point out here. All right, that link is obviously a phishing link. All right, so first of all, that link is terrible. That is a trash link. Do not click on that link because that will take you to a place that you don't want to go, right? And it's probably trying to take over your browser or try to get you to download malicious malware or something along those lines. Just realized there we go, a little bit brighter. So just understand that that is a bad link. That is something that you don't want to do. There's also a couple other things. It's really just the name, right? Exactly. Maybe the dot helped it bypass or something through the rules. They're probably looking for something that says passwords, and then putting the dot allowed it to bypass the rules in 365. But it's the name, it's the it's the name of the user account. I've never heard of this corporation, Proaction-INS. I don't know a Corey there. Right. So all of these questions, you should be asking yourself all of these questions when you're looking at an email. Don't just click on links. Don't just download stuff. If someone sends you an invoice and you're like, hey, which user is this? Right? Which company is this? I downloaded their invoice, their Word document, and I never heard of them before. You probably already went too far, right? They may already be on your system. They may have already infected your machine or your browser in some way. So whenever you're looking at information, even if it comes from someone that you know, right? So great example, Chris, right? If you get an email from Jeremy and it didn't come from Jeremy, how are you going to know that, right? There's probably going to be a couple factors, okay? There's probably going to be a bad link, a bad name, but regardless, even if it comes from someone you know, that doesn't mean that you should necessarily be getting into a scenario where you're just clicking on links, right? Comes from the CEO, comes from the CFO, comes from the CTO, doesn't matter who sends you the email. If you don't recognize it, if it seems new, abnormal, it has a weird link, it has a weird email address, even if the email was actually properly spoofed, which is possible, you don't want to just be clicking on things, all right? Again, as the first line of defense with user training specifically, this is one of the most important things that I could probably talk about, all right?
If it's in your mailbox and you want to open it to get to that level, are you compromising anything at that point?
So the new version of in the past, you were compromising stuff as soon as you opened the email on your Outlook client. However, Outlook and 365 in general have come a long way in that time. Other clients like Gmail and the like are similar in this way. But basically, when you open up that email in the client, it is not actually doing anything. It is a method of preview, is what they call it. And that preview does not allow execution. The only thing that allows execution is if you actually move it to your machine or if you click on a link that your browser navigates to. Opening the email is no longer considered an insecure pathway. You could read it directly.
If you're up to date on
Yep.
Office or Microsoft 365.
Yep, exactly. And there are updates that get pushed from 365 that manipulate your Outlook client. So just be aware that that is true. What Brian is saying, your OS needs to be updated to meet all the newest classifications. Sometimes some of it is in 365. Sometimes the changes have to do with your Exchange mail rules. Other times it has to do with your local Outlook client and how it handles things. Right. So sometimes that comes through a 365 update. Sometimes it's through the OS. Right. Good question. Good point. And then Jeff, good point there as well. Email headers are a great way to examine that information. Another way to do this is you can actually copy that link, right? And you can take it to any.run. I think it's any.run. I think that's the full path there, any.run, right? So any.run is basically a website that allows you to basically navigate to a URL, a malicious URL in this case, and to validate what happens. It runs it for free on Windows 7, 32-bit with IE, with Internet Explorer. You can pay for a better access and things like that. But any.run is basically a sandbox that you get for free for 1 minute. So or maybe 2 minutes or something like that. So you can give it a link, a bad link, and just see what happens. If it takes over the machine and crashes it and ransomwares the box, awesome. You got to see that in someone else's environment, doesn't affect you at all, and you can actually communicate that information to a client, right? It makes you look awesome. You can say, hey, this phishing email that we blocked to your organization actually caused this problem. It could have ransomwared all your boxes. What is your backup? How do your backups look? Are you using endpoint protection? Right? What does that process look like for you? So being able to kind of test these things real world before taking it to a client, for us that are in the consulting business and looking to get into even just engineering in general, especially on the blue team side of things, communicating about exactly what happens and being able to determine that even is next level. Okay, so there you go. There's some.
So you
Yeah, go
just
ahead.
put that in the URL any.run.
Yeah, let me just validate that that's exactly where do I go to here.
Thank you very much.
Yep, there you go. That is exactly the URL there. And the any.run website is free. You have to create an account to get access, but it's free in terms of that immediate ability to validate what that link is doing. And it not only does it show you that this is actually perfect for us blue teamers in the class. Not only does it show you what happens visually, it gives you literally a video feed of the box. Even if it gets ransomware, it shows you the feed as long as it can. But what it does while it's doing that, here, let's just take a look. Why talk about it? Let's just be about it.
What is you said blue something. What were you
Blue team
referencing? What's blue team?
So on the cybersecurity side, we have two different teams. We have the attackers, which are considered the red teamers, and we have the blue team, which are basically considered the defenders, right? So defenders are blue teamers, attackers are red teamers. And on the blue team side of things, one of the things that we are constantly looking for is are what's known as IOCs, indicators of compromise, also known as TTPs, threats, techniques, and persistence, something like that. TTPs and IOCs are basically the two qualifiers for any type of attack. So if you look at MITRE ATT&CK, which is a really big, they're a big player in the space. MITRE ATT&CK framework, they have a lot. There we go. Procedures. Thank you, Jeff. If you look at MITRE ATT&CK, they will have a bunch of TTPs, and these TTPs follow. Here's another acronym for you: APTs, right? Advanced Persistent Threats, and these are essentially nation-state actors. So APTs are nation-state actors. They utilize TTPs, which basically create IOCs, indicators of compromise, and blue teamers can utilize those to perform things like threat hunting. They can utilize those to basically perform checks against all of their endpoints or try to secure their endpoints to some degree. This is basically what they're always looking for. Their SIEMs create IOCs and TTPs so they can constantly keep looking for them in their environment. So any.run actually does that for you. You can look at some public tasks here, and let's just look at this one. This one doesn't even require me to be logged in. So this was just someone else's build here. It took them to match only ap.biz, and I don't see what it did in the browser, but you can kind of see some of the things that it did over here. It looks like it took you to a 403 forbidden at the end. So this one doesn't look that interesting, but you can see all the connections that it made. You can see all the processes that got called. And so if you get malware that drops on a system, any.run will actually show you what that malware does on the system, where it connects back to in terms of its IP address, whether that IP address is known to have a bad reputation, and so forth. This is just one of the things that we could do. We could pop out a report. We could look at a graph. There's a whole lot of things that you could do and kind of manipulate this information, and all of that is free.
That's really cool.
Yep. So that's a really good one. I recommend using that if you guys again are a consultant or you're looking at a cybersecurity scenario. Being able to give like bad data to a box. These are called sandboxes. Sandboxing a piece of malware is what this is. Sandboxing is extremely crucial as a cybersecurity consultant or analyst to understand what exactly that malware is doing. This is also what people who get into reverse engineering do. They look at malware, they try to understand it so they can write up a report on it and basically describe things like IOCs. Yep. And Jeff, I actually tried to spin up Cuckoo in my own environment, but I was on Proxmox, and for whatever reason, I had an error. I can't remember what it is. I have a ticket. I'm going to go back to it and actually figure that out at some point. And I would love to spin up a sandbox locally, but again, I'm going to have to make sure that whenever I do that, I actually kind of segment that network out so that in case it kind of performs a breakout, doesn't break anything. All right. Very true. Very true. Okay. So next step here. Okay. Again, great questions there. I prefer to just have chat. So if you have a question or whatever,
I'm sorry.
no, feel free. I actually prefer it. I think it's easier it makes my job easier. And again, if we're answering questions or we're talking back and forth, normally that's a better scenario anyways. Okay. So appreciate it. Next part here is passwords versus passphrases. Most of us understand this. All right. And I'm going to say it again. Most of us understand this. So you probably already get why you should be using passphrases. You may not yet. All right. This is something that I like to refer to as eating your own dog food. All right, maybe that needs an acronym. What is that? EY. No, that's not going to work. Okay, but eating your own dog food essentially is basically a cybersecurity consultant saying something and then actually doing it, right? So there's a big difference between saying, "Hey, you need to do this because it's more secure." If I show you that I'm actually doing something and I tell you it's more secure, it's going to be easier for you to accept, right? Again, we're talking about that trust and that relationship building, especially when we're talking about clients. But overall, understanding that really just doing the thing that you said that you were going to do, or expecting someone else to do, doing it yourself, first of all, that's a good look, right? But there are real reasons to use passphrases over passwords. Passphrases are not found in password lists anywhere. So as an attacker, if I'm trying to guess your password and I don't even have passphrases and you're using a passphrase, I'm not going to figure it out. Period. That is how that works. I do not have password lists with passphrases in them. Period. Nobody really does. It's still something that the attackers have not really they're not prepared to attack passphrases. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Okay, so if you're using a passphrase, it is a better scenario. Now, what is a passphrase? A passphrase is really the difference between a passphrase and a password is like this could be a password. All right, that is not necessarily a secure password. It is kind of secure. It's like what 10 something. It's completely randomized. But this is the difference. That is a bad, or this is probably an okay password. This is a bad password.
So the charts that you see like on LinkedIn, people post where they'll show, if you have this many letters and numbers, this many letters, number, symbols, and it shows like, something's like 450 years before that would be hacked. Are those not, they don't hold any weight?
So they do hold weight, but what they're describing very specifically there is if I am trying to not just brute force your password, but if I've created something known as a rainbow table. So let's say that I know that you have 12 characters in your password. I can create a rainbow table that is specifically like only digits, only characters, only numerics. It could be alphanumeric. It could be alphanumeric with extra characters. If I kind of understood your password to a degree, those numbers are not valid. If I have any information on how your password is designed, that number goes from 450 million years to like a few weeks.
Wow.
So having something that is not guessable, first of all, is one of the most important concepts here.
Well, so that tells me that a password is going to be harder to hack because it's, like your random letters versus a passphrase is going to be something that you thought up.
Exactly.
And
And this is the part that's confusing, right? Because a password, even those random character sets where it's just like a full random, it was just some person touching random keys on their keyboard 12 times. That
yeah,
is easier to crack than a passphrase 100% of the time because I have a password list that has that inside of it,
that
right?
doesn't make sense to me, but I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, so and I'll describe it here. So if you have like summer 13, right, summer 2022, these are really terrible passwords. Those are in password lists 100% of the time. But what other people will do is they'll create password lists is basically like, okay, up from like 6 to 12 characters, alphanumeric password list. That is every possible password from 6 to 12 characters with alphanumeric. So again, if you're using a special character, you're not going to be in that password list. So that's good. But of course, we've made those password lists too. They're a little bit longer, of course,
Yeah.
right? Spaces and extra characters and weird special keys. Those are all really good. You can even use emojis in passwords. That's big brain right there. But if you're doing just regular passwords, they're going to be in someone's list. And the difference between what you see on those posts on LinkedIn and things where it says like 480 million years, what they're talking about is for someone to have no knowledge on your password. That is a requirement for it to take that long. Because if I have
Yeah.
any knowledge, it's going to be much quicker. But it's basically like 0 to 30 characters, and I'm giving one computer that job. Crack this one password. That will take 480 million years,
Okay.
right? Because it's
Can I
basically
ask you
every
something that's
possibility.
off topic, or
Of course, go for it.
okay, so LastPass, I know it has been hacked and has vulnerabilities just like everything else. What are your thoughts? Like, what's best practices regarding a password manager?
And we're actually getting into this momentarily, but password managers are basically the proper way to fix all of these problems generally. Password managers are, especially LastPass, because they are basically the number one dog for a long time. They're very much like Microsoft. People give Microsoft a lot of trash for being bad at security, but honestly, they're one of the best on the planet. The issue is that they're a huge target. Huge. Everyone uses Windows, and it was the same with LastPass. Everyone used LastPass until they got hacked, right? It's just like with SolarWinds. Everyone used SolarWinds until
Yeah,
they got hacked, right? So these scenarios cause a shift in that space, that specific space. Password managers, I guess that's what like RMM suites for SolarWinds and Microsoft with operating system. People moved to Mac and Linux and things like that over time because Microsoft is kind of deemed a not secure OS. But it really has to do with how big of a target you are. And LastPass, unfortunately, they were succeeding so well that someone figured out some vulnerabilities. I guarantee you there are vulnerabilities on other password managers. So don't think that just because one gets hit and one doesn't, that this one is the one that's not secure. That's not how that works, right?
yeah.
It is just a targeting issue.
Well, you'd also think that they would change their practices and they would
Of
bolster up,
course,
get the blue hats or the blue teamers together and improve things. So
100%.
it might be the safest place to be again.
Exactly. 100, and that's exactly how you need to when you're talking to people again, when we're talking to people who are not necessarily in cyber, we need to understand these concepts so that whenever those questions come up, because that question comes up all the time, specifically the LastPass question, we need to be able to communicate about it in the right way. We're not, it doesn't make sense to bash the company. It's not the company's fault. Vulnerabilities happen. The what is at fault, or I guess the part that I would fault them for, is how they respond to it. But from
Yeah.
everything that I've seen, it seems like their response has been okay so far. They are trying to bolster security, of course, as any company would do, and they're trying to eliminate those threats. Right now, again, they had two in less than 6 months. So, am I telling people to use LastPass? Not necessarily. This is what I'm going to tell people, though. Okay, you ready? I say do your own research. I know that's kind of a cop out to a degree, but I performed a lot of research, and this is not I'm not going to say use this one. This is the one that I use. After a lot of research, I utilize OnePass as my password manager because for a few reasons, right? Those reasons may mean nothing to you. It was like there's a there's a movement one. So if you're on the move, if you're going through an airport, you can turn on a specific like travel mode, and it basically eliminates all your passwords from your phone. Right. So if someone steals your phone and they have your passphrase, or maybe they can elicit your passphrase and unlock your password manager, then technically they have all of your passwords. That's not really a good cyber deal, right? So they could do that with all my machines, my Windows device, all that stuff is the same. But again, you know, at the border, in other countries, in other scenarios, sometimes having that information not on your personal device is actually a good idea. So that was something that kind of sold me on OnePass. But they all are a little bit different. All of them all have their own features, own UIs, kind of how they operate. OnePass is really basic. It works for me. It's pretty cheap. They're all pretty cheap, to be honest.
Yeah.
But that's kind of what I recommend. This is in terms
How
of
often do you
passphrases.
recommend changing your master password?
So your master password should not be used anywhere else. And so technically, and this is true from NIST and Microsoft both agree with this now, as long as this password has not been leaked anywhere, there are no more requirements on flipping passwords. You're not supposed to recommend users flip passwords anymore, because what happens is it creates these types of passwords.
Oh, then that's another thing I do, but generally for not, you know, important websites, I guess I'd say, for credentials, I will use the password generator, and I thought that was very safe, but now after this.
Well, so that's the thing, is like a password generator that creates passphrases is very safe. And honestly, a password generator that creates passphrases, let me make mine kick off here.
I'll have to take a look and see if it offers that. I haven't seen that.
Yeah, I can basically click on password generator. Here, I can show this part. This is just literally it's a tiny app here. This is what OnePass looks like. It's just a little, it just pops up, just a little like tooltip or whatever. And I can basically just say, you know.
Yeah.
And all of these are extremely secure. All you have to do to make this more secure is add some uppercases, add some characters at the end, and this is probably one of the most secure passwords, passphrases that you could ever create. The dashes, the reason I use dashes over spaces is that not every website accepts spaces. And so dashes are more well accepted across the board. But it's the same. I don't have password lists that have passwords with a lot of dashes in them like that. My password lists don't look like that. The password list that I download on the internet to try to hack passwords don't look like that either. All right. Yeah. So the best way to do this is not to do the summer 2020. I know a lot of government organizations are in this scenario where they basically are forced to flip passwords. You're not supposed to be recommending that if you can. There are some requirements to flip passwords every quarter, every 2 quarters, whatever it is. You can't always get past that. That could be a compliance issue. And this is why compliance is not always the best way to perform security. But those are that's just the reality of the situation.
Okay. Right? Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Again, great question. I would rather talk about stuff than honestly anything else.
I have a lot of questions regarding
feel free.
Pass. But I don't want to take up everybody else's time. And
I appreciate it. What we can do is, like, if we want to, we'll connect after this, and we can have as many conversations as we want. We'll set up a call, and we can just
That's awesome. I'd love to do that. Yep.
Fantastic. Okay. So MFA, right? Jeremy just pointed this out, right? Someone needed to basically try to get into his bank login, but of course he has MFA, as all of us should. Now, do we like MFA? Probably not. Probably most of us don't like MFA, and that's completely okay. That is part of the process, is part of the game. What I say is that security is always a battle. It is a balance of usability versus security. If you increase usability, you're normally decreasing security. It is almost always a 1-to-1 ratio. All right, I can show you that. Hey, if we use MFA, we're going to have more tickets. I guarantee you, we are going to have more tickets. Period. Users are not going to understand how to use MFA. They're going to get stuck. They're going to have questions, and it may actually be exponential tickets for the first couple of months while users get accustomed to it. However, does it increase security? 1,000,000%. MFA is actually one of the easiest ways to get a security posture to increase by 10, 20, even 30%. Because if I'm an attacker and I land on your system and I try to authenticate to something and it requires MFA, the chances of me getting through that just went just sunk by a substantial amount. If I have access to a service, my chances of getting into that service are roughly anywhere from 20 to 30%, give or take, just for any service on the planet. If I'm on your environment directly, locally on that environment, and I can see a service and interact with it directly, 20 to 30% are my chances of just owning that box through that service. So if there's enough machines and enough services, I'm going to own something eventually. Okay, that's kind of how that works. It's just part of the process. MFA, on the other hand, really throws a wrench into that conversation, because if I run into a service that needs to authenticate with MFA, I don't really have a lot of options. The only thing that is going to be good for me as an attacker is what's known as push MFA, or push notifications with MFA. Push MFA is the worst type of MFA that has ever been created, because it allows for an attack called, I'm going to call it basically MFA exhaustion. All right. And what this means is, if I send enough requests to a user, if I send 20 requests to a user, they will say yes eventually. 100%. I guarantee. Jeremy, Chris, Brian, even me, right? I am susceptible to this, okay? Because eventually I might think it's an error. And I might just say, get out of here. I don't want all these requests, man. Get off my phone. I'm busy. As soon as you say yes, I'm in, and it's all over.
Yeah, I have a personal comment on that. So at
Sure.
UTC, we implemented a push notification system back in November, and that was there. It's called Duo Mobile. I don't know if you heard of it.
Mhm.
And that's the new thing we use here now. And it seems like there's been like an uptick in complaints
Yes.
of students' stuff getting compromised. And like I've witnessed students just like they'll get like a notification, they'll just say yes because they think it's like a personal computer. And I've had random notifications come in the middle of the night, and I've like checked, it shows the location, it shows Chattanooga, or Nashville, wherever my equipment's registered at, and it's really hard to tell.
Yep. And again, if I was an attacker, that scenario would be a win for me. I would eventually find a way in through one of those users 100% of the time. You don't want to use push notifications. You want to push back on push notifications as
So,
much as you possibly can as a consultant or someone in IT.
so services like Verizon Mobile, when you go to authenticate and they send you a text, that's a push notification,
That's a
correct?
little bit different. A push notification is literally, it shows up on the front face of your phone and you just say, yep, that is a push notification. The other types of notifications can be SMS. Those are not great, but they're still really difficult to get around. And then Duo is the other one. Duo Mobile allows for push notifications, but it also has just the standard code, the security code. Security codes are extremely difficult to bypass in 2023. It is not simple. I basically have to take over your phone. I have to be physically next to you at the bare minimum. The likelihood is I actually have to own your phone, or I have to call you and social engineer you out of that code within 30 seconds. Good luck. Right? That's
So
impossible. That is a
that's
very
what
difficult scenario.
University of Tennessee Chattanooga is using. Is that what you're saying, Chris? They're
We
using Duo Mobile.
use it's a push notification. Like it has a there's two options. It's either a push notification, which most people use, and then there's a password that's revealed on the app itself. Like let's say I try to sign in my email, and it'll take me to Duo's webpage, and it says send a push to my cell phone or enter password, and you go into the app and you enter the password. But a lot of people, including myself, use the push notification. It's a whole lot more convenient.
And again, right? Usability versus security. So the users are happy. Okay, and honestly,
But
the admins were happy.
UTC would be better served to not offer the push notification and just do the password.
I feel like it like
From a
the
security
security
perspective,
here.
right? Like
Right.
the admins, they have to deal with their own problems, right? The admins and the security guys sometimes butt heads, and the admins, they're like, okay, cool, we're getting more complaints now because we're only using the passwords or the codes with MFA. And then you're like, okay, as a security guy, you're like, okay, look, it's going to lower the posture a little bit, but if you want for a reduction in cases and calls and stuff, we can use push notifications. That is a compromise. But I'm just telling you, I'm letting you guys know very specifically that as an attacker, a push notification is the only type of MFA that I'm happy about seeing. It is the only type of MFA that I have a chance of getting through. The rest of the MFA types are basically 100%. They're not 100%, but generally 100% secure because I have to physically be next to you. With push notifications, that's not how it works. I send you a notification and you just say yes eventually, and now I'm in. That's not a good system. That's not, from a security perspective, that is not secure enough in my mind. And so again, we may not win that argument.
Checks the box though.
It does. And for compliance, if you need MFA, push notification checks that box. That's a good idea.
Yep.
From the admin's perspective, from the compliance perspective, the auditor's perspective, that's great. But from the people who actually care about security, if we're worried about more devices and users being compromised, I'm telling you, again, like if you heard about an increase in users getting compromised, it's possible that this actually created a scenario that was less secure than before, especially if you don't have to use passwords at all. If it's just like if you want to authenticate, I know some of these they're basically, it's called SSO, single sign-on, and it's just like you are logged into something maybe on your phone, and then you just log into the app, and then it sends you a push notification, and that's it. And so there's no real like password anymore. So the push notification is the only thing that you need to authenticate. In that way, that is kind of like less secure. There's actually, it's not multi-factor anymore, is it? It's kind of like single factor again. And the single factor is really just an action on the user's part.
Is the push notification coming over the mobile network, or is that just over the internet?
So technically it depends if you're connected to cellular or through wireless. If you're connected to Wi-Fi with your phone, then it would be over the internet. Otherwise, it'd be over cellular. And so technically, could that thing be captured with something like a Stingray device? Yes.
Yeah.
Potentially, right? And again, this is the issue with SMS messages for MFA. They could be captured by a Stingray device, which is basically just a device that pretends to be a cellular tower. However, that requires the attacker to be physically next to you, right? It's a lot easier for me to pretend to be in Chattanooga with a VPN than it is to actually be in Chattanooga, right? And so that adds a whole nother threat element. You're adding the entire world if I can do that attack remotely. If I have to be local,
you're not the easy target at that point either.
Bingo. And this is called, we call this lowest hanging fruit. We're going to go after that lowest hanging fruit 100% of the time, no matter what. Because, to be honest, a lot of attackers it's two things. We're either a little bit lazy or we're very busy. But it could be even a black hat, even a malicious attacker. They can be busy. They can have a lot of engagements running against their targets, right? These are the same terminology they would use as a white hat, but black hats have the same issue, right? They're going after the easiest clients, the easiest attacks, because it's easier.
We got a quota to hit.
Right, they got a quota. I mean, and no joke, some of these black hats actually work for companies, and they're getting paid salary just like we might be. So those people, they are going to their job. They're just attacking people who, again, are innocent. Companies that, they're performing illegal attacks, at least here in the States. Not every country has the same rules regarding cybersecurity. I recommend you guys look into cybersecurity laws if you're not in the States to validate whether or not you can even perform cybersecurity at all. I know, like, for instance, Chile, you can't do any ethical hacking in Chile at all. It's completely illegal. Now, is that better? Yeah.
There's full-on black hat organizations like I understand like a team that was like assembled and they're like together through like Discord or something, but no, you're talking about people who are on payroll to steal information. I've never heard of that before. I never thought of it that way. Usually I've always thought of like an individual or a team of people working towards compromising some information.
Right. 100%. And honestly, what's hilarious is that they've grown so large that they have HR departments now.
Customer service, you can call them up. Why'd you take my stuff?
So, people have to get fired, right? People don't hit their quotas, like Brian was saying, right? You actually have requirements because you're getting paid. So at the beginning, right, if we think of like Anonymous, right, if we think of Mr. Robot, those types of scenarios are like what we think of when we're thinking of black hats, where we're thinking of hackers that are out to do malicious harm. But the reality of the situation is that things are changing. A lot of this is state sanctioned, especially the organizations that I'm talking about. Some of those are state sanctioned organizations in terms of where the money's coming from, but there's separation from the state. Okay, so that is kind of how sometimes there's like requirements there, and that's why they've become more organized over time and things like that. But these people are not necessarily like the brightest apples, right? They're just people, right? And they're given resources, and they're just trying to attack and gain access to people's computers so they can steal stuff for the organization so it can be sold or whatever. That conversation is really big, but it's really interesting to kind of think about all those scenarios.
Are they generally tied to the government, or are they private companies?
So it depends on the government. Most governments and the big players in this space are obviously China, Russia, the United States, and there's a few outliers: North Korea, Taiwan, even South Korea. Israel is a really big player. They have a really phenomenal team. Even Germany. Germany has a phenomenal team as well. Anyone who's really part of the Five Eyes. Australia has a phenomenal team. And again, those guys are good. But these organizations I'm talking about are kind of like they're like second or third tier. They're not like the best of the best. They're separated. They have a long arm away from the government, and that's even just maybe, right? They could just be backed by anyone. It could be an organization. This could all be through multiple companies. It could be all under the table. It's very difficult to perform something called attribution, which means determining who the attacker actually is. That is not an easy conversation. Talking about it is extremely interesting, but determining the answer, not straightforward. There are attackers. There are attackers that are like Chinese attackers that are actually using Russian character codes. So it looks like whenever they design their malware that they're actually using a literal Russian keyboard. But of course, all of that is just being augmented, right? It's being spoofed on the operating system. And whenever you used to be able to look at stuff like that and just be like, oh, well, obviously it's a Russian, right? Because they're using a Russian keyboard, maybe Ukrainian, somewhere around, at least in that area. But now that information completely meaningless because we've learned how to bypass and spoof those methods of attribution. And so the only way that we can actually say who anyone is via this APT process. I'll give you guys a link here.
Well,
This
it
is kind
seems
of
like
where we'll
we're
call it.
way behind the 8 ball too on, like probably due to volume and, going after the biggest offenders and, the last pass that get attacked, those are getting investigated, I'd say much quicker than smaller organizations, which
Sure.
now the SMB and the mid-market are now targets, and they're
Right,
probably
exactly.
easier to attack because they have less security policies in place.
This is actually a phenomenal point here, Brian, because this is why Jeremy and I work for a few organizations that basically train people to move into this sector. And one of the issues at the moment is there is this huge gap between corporate cyber and everything that you just talked about, medium and small businesses and where they're at. And the medium and small businesses are the new targets of this day. It used to be the big organizations were the main targets because they actually had stuff, but the medium and the small businesses still have things. It's less money, it's less IP, it's less PII, whatever it is, but there's still information there and it's easier to hack. So from a organizational perspective, from a United States
Also
perspective,
adjacent to other
yeah.
larger companies.
Mhm.
They
Yeah,
may
of
be a
course.
vendor for, a government contractor, or they
Right.
may be a vendor for, something. I have a personal experience with
Mhm.
an industrial supply piping company that does commercial government projects. And one of the larger companies was attacked and came through and it tried to attack them through a web environment. And they
Exactly.
actually were lucky, but what it did was raise an eyebrow and it became a big driver for a project that we were working on.
Exactly. That's phenomenal. And again, SCADA and ICS, which is those types of systems that you're talking about, those are some of the easiest systems to attack. They're like IoT devices from 2008, 2010. They are terrible in terms of cyber, like literally no cybersecurity at all. They went from uh, not digital devices to digital like overnight. And whenever that happened, nobody added cybersecurity to that manufacturing process. And so you'll see a bunch of SCADA and ICS out there that is just a web server that if you gain access to that web server, that's it. That's all you need. You can start to actually cause changes at the power plant, at the water filtering plant, whatever it is. And that's where a lot of these things are. Is it's our backbone infrastructure. And of course, those infrastructures are some of the most important things that we need to be securing. So again, I'm kind of going to end it here with this last topic here about APTs. But this is really our only way that we can kind of track APTs is based off their TTPs and what they do. And we attempt to perform attribution, but it doesn't mean that we actually know who it is. So we do our best there, right? Some of these APTs go after ICS. So APT 30, suspected attribution from China. Oops, ICS, can we look at SCADA? Maybe there'll be a SCADA here. Nope, ICS. I'm not sure they're going to have any. No, nothing specific. They're probably going to have the long form, but ICS and SCADA are actually some topics that some APTs target specifically, and those are the types of malicious state actors that are attacking, you know, our infrastructure here in the States. And so again, I'm just gonna. This is how I'm gonna wrap it up here, and we can ask some more questions and kind of finish up here. But what I want to state, my end conversation here is, all of us need to kind of be aware of some of these cybersecurity concepts because they are directly affecting not only our jobs, right? Especially us consultants and us who are trying to get into IT and cyber, even for those of us who are in sales, right? Chris, Jeremy, y'all working on this part too. A lot of people don't understand this, but this is all it will directly affect us someday. 100%, all of us will be directly affected by an attack, likely from an adversary, and it will likely cause quite a bit of damage. And so really our only objective, our objective right now is to try to increase the cybersecurity posture of all organizations, all government, private, public organizations, all of us utilizing password managers, just basically increasing cybersecurity across the board. That's really all that we can do. I can't go out here and say that I'm going to secure the United States against one of our adversaries. We can't even say that we're going to be able to do that for one single company. But what we can do is our best, right? That's really all that we can do. Our best is all that we can do. It's all that we got, really. And this is how we do it, right? We learn, we communicate, we share information, we do knowledge transfers, right? Data dumps, whatever you want to call it. And this is kind of what we're doing. This is why Jeremy and I are starting to work together and trying to have some of these conversations and to bring some of you into these conversations as well in the future, so that we can start to perform these actions more often, so that we can create community around cyber ideas and concepts. All right. And that's it. That's all I got, guys.
That's awesome. Thank you very much.
Of course. I appreciate it. Go ahead and hit the, you can stop the recording there, Jeremy. And then just for a little bit, I just want to give us just a